Okay. Hi, I'm Senior Investigator Molinoff, the New Ulm Police Department. I'd like to welcome you to our community notification meeting where we'll be discussing a level 3 predatory offender that will be transitioning back into our community. We at the New Ulm Police Department believe an informed community is a safer community. It's our hope that the information provided in this presentation will be informative and answer any questions that you may have. If there are any questions after watching this presentation, please feel free to contact myself at the New Ulm Police Department or Agent Brad Vandervaart, who will be speaking very shortly. Our contact information will be provided at the end of this video. So again, joining me today is going to be DOC Notification Coordinator Agent Brad Vandervaart and DOC Intensive Supervision Release Agent Gary Wilford. And with that, I'll turn it over to Agent Vandervaart.
All right. Well, hello and thank you for taking the time to review this important information. And as you heard, my name is Brad Vandervaart with the Minnesota Department of Corrections, and I am with the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And I'm here today to provide you information not only about the individual you've come to learn about, but about the state's broader risk management system and how it applies to this person specifically and more broadly. So as we get into the information, you can expect this to come in three really distinct parts. I'll begin with some of those historical components that found and create the formation of that broader risk management system for the entire state. Use that information as an overlay then as we get into the specifics about the person you're here to learn about today. And then I will go on into some information about resources as you are looking to apply this into your own personal, family, and broader community safety planning efforts. And so the place I really like to begin with conversations like this is where we all have that basic understanding. And that is that those individuals that engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, they exist. And what we know from our data and research is that they exist within all communities, or at least at the very least, pass through all communities throughout the state day after day. And so the real question comes down to then, what is it that we're doing as agencies on the state level, down to county level and city level and so on, to address those individuals who have become known to that broader risk management system? And one of the first components that's come online in that system is the registry. Originally known as the Sex Offender Registry, it began in 1991 and is really founded on the advocacy of the Jacob Wetterling family and onto broader organizations and agencies that really went around to local law enforcement and beyond and asked the question of what can we do to assist you and your agencies in the work of effectively managing and policing those within this unique population. And what law enforcement really resoundingly said was what we need is a way to collate our data, because up until the registry, information attained through investigations would be housed in agencies and shared only after the fact. And so with the registry, this information becomes more broadly available to all agencies throughout the state in a real-time effort to ensure that they can move as quickly to any unique scenarios as they may arise. And so, as you can see, a large amount of information in detail is collected and maintained by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in the Predatory Offender Registry. Information like the registrant's primary address and any secondary addresses that they may also frequent. So think of places like vacation property or cabins or the homes of significant others if they're going there with some frequency. They also must register their employment. That's all employment that they have. And if they operate a motor vehicle for that employer, that must also be made known to law enforcement. They have to make sure law enforcement's aware of any schools that they may be attending or vehicles that they themselves either use, own, or possess. Other components of the registry consist of their phone numbers, marks, scars, tattoos, and any kind of storage units that they may rent, like a storage locker as well. So you can see the robustness of the data collected and maintained in the registry. So then typically the next question that'll come along then is, well, then who has to register on this system? And that's actually grown and changed since its inception in the early 90s, where initially it was only those convicted of sex crimes. And it has been broadened as the state has come to see the effectiveness of this system to include other non-sex specific types of crimes such as kidnapping and false imprisonment. And that is why the name change came online from the sex offender registry to the predatory offender registry. And a simple way to keep it straight in your mind as we go forward today with this information is this, is that all sex offenders are predatory offenders, while not all predatory offenders are sex offenders. And so just use that to keep it straight in your mind as we go forward today. Now, the registry is by law set for law enforcement purposes only and is not accessible to the public unless a registrant falls out of compliance for an extended period of time. But for meetings like this, I'm able to take a snapshot, kind of a 30,000-foot flyover view to show you and give you some context about what's going on within your community and broader region. And as you can see from the information I have here, as of the first of the year, we had approximately 18,727 registered individuals within our state. That's all registered individuals, those with no level assigned and those of levels 1 through 3. And as of the 7th, when I most recently ran these numbers, you can see the breakdown for communities around your area. Keep in mind that this data is very dynamic, as these individuals do move around with some frequency for a variety of reasons. But again, as of the 7th, when this snapshot was taken, you can see 72 registered individuals reside or report primary residence within Brown County. 2 of whom, that smaller number to the right, are those who are subject to broad public notification, so those that are designated risk levels of 3. You can look at New Ulm proper. Again, those reporting primary residence here in New Ulm. There are 45 of those 72 residing primarily within New Ulm. Those 2 that are in Brown County are here as well. And so you can look at other neighboring communities throughout your region. And the thing I want you to take away is this, is you see the larger number to the left, that's all registered individuals, no level assigned all the way up and through 3, and the smaller number to the right. But even communities like Redwood County and Wantagh County, you can see that there are registered individuals residing within their borders. They do not have any that are subject to broad public notification, but I would not want anyone residing in those areas to have any less awareness of this important information. Another component of the broader state risk management system that I want to share with you today is the Community Notification Act. Now, the Notification Act came online further down in 1997. It is really founded on the knowledge and understanding that a well-informed community is, in fact, a safer community. Often when receiving a notice of a registered individual who's taken up residence in or near your community, it can send a shockwave of fear and anxiety. But through these systems, we've not only mitigated those risk factors, we've also enhanced those protective factors. And so by participating in community notification, by viewing this video and proliferating it out there and sharing it with those in and around your area, you help to mitigate that risk further by simply being aware. And so because the Notification Act is the reason we're here and able to share this important information today, it's worth going into some more detail as to how it works. And so, as you've heard me talk with my previous slide, not all registered predatory offenders are subject to risk level assessment or assignment, and therefore are not subject to community notification. In order to be looked at for a risk level, you must have crossed the threshold of prison. Obviously, that's any prison within the state of Minnesota or any prison nationally to include U.S. territories or any federal prisons to include military prisons. It does not apply to those juvenile registrants, those adjudicated for sex offending conduct or behavior, or those adults who've received or been granted by the court a stayed or probationary sentence, where they're allowed to remain in the community under the watchful eyes of a probation officer with specific terms and conditions imposed by that sentencing court. Those groups do not get levels assessed or assigned. They fall into that no level assigned category. It does not mean that there are not risk factors to contemplate, just simply means they're not measured or weighted. So for those that cross the threshold, the question next that comes up is who does what? So the number of folks coming into prison does fluctuate and change, but year after year, the way it works is once they've come in, the end of confinement review committee will assess their risk with the assistance of a risk assessment tool known as the MinSOST, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. Now, it's important to understand a little bit about this tool is it is how risk levels are determined. So this tool was built out of a large study conducted right here in Minnesota that began in the early 90s when these laws were beginning to take shape. And the initial part concluded in the early 2000s, so over a decade's time, where over 3,166 known adult sex offenders re-entered the community over that period. And the assessors marked their successes and their failures. And this information informed that risk assessment tool. It was then vetted through the scientific review process and ultimately became that normed risk assessment tool we utilize today. So when I speak to you about a level 1 individual, know that I am speaking specifically to that peer group from that study. So a level 1 individual has a lower amount of those known predictive risk factors as compared to the group. A level 2 has a moderate amount, and a level 3 has a higher amount. And so this is where the tool has its strengths. But know this, that no matter how good a risk assessment tool is, it cannot predict the future. It is not capable of doing that. While it assists law enforcement and probation and corrections in their efforts to mitigate those known predictive factors and enhance those protective factors, it cannot predict the future. And another thing to keep in mind is that risk is dynamic. It is changing as the individual is going through programming, treatment, counseling, and aging. And that risk does shift. So a level 1 individual today may find if they are not engaging in the conduct and behavior that they are supposed to be engaging in, that their risk level's reassessed and moves up. Just the same as a level 3 individual who shows over a lengthy period of time that they are managing their behavior and conduct appropriately and safely within the community may be reassessed and find that their risk level comes down. So keep that in mind. So once the end of confinement review committee assesses and assigns that risk level, the handoff then goes to our partners in law enforcement, and they provide notification within the scope of the level assigned. So for a level 1 individual, law enforcement will provide notification to other law enforcement agencies, to include correctional agencies. They'll provide information to victims of or witnesses to the offense if they've requested that level of enhanced notification. And they'll also provide notification to those adult household members living in that registrant's immediate home, in that household. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. A level 2 notification builds on those individuals and entities that we just described and includes other identified individuals or entities that law enforcement determines to be at particular risk based on that registrant's known pattern of offending conduct or behavior. And so it's often believed with a level 2 that notification will be provided to churches, schools, things of that nature, where daycares where children are known to congregate. And while that may be true, it's not always the case. So in a scenario where a level 2 individual has entered a community and law enforcement's been made aware, and they determine through that dossier of information provided to them by the risk assessment and notification unit that this person focuses their conduct and behavior on adult females at social gatherings. Think of places like bars or concert venues or things like that. And so in that scenario, law enforcement may find that it's more prudent to notify the proprietors of those venues of this individual so they're keeping a watchful eye or informing their security staff appropriately, versus just notifying all schools and daycares where this individual may not be focusing their conduct and behavior and only cause confusion and fear among those groups. Now, on the same note, with a level 2 that's entered a community and law enforcement reviews that information and determines that this person focuses their conduct and behavior on those unaccompanied minors. Think of teens in transit from school to after-school programs or home. And law enforcement knows within their community that they have a teen hangout location, a hotspot, where teens are known to congregate and socialize in those down times. In this scenario, law enforcement may very well use that information and that level 2 ability to go to the proprietor of that hangout spot and let them know of the individual. And ultimately say something to the effect of, if you see this person loitering about or creating those relationships with these teens that are here, let us know. We'd like to come out and talk with them and perhaps find out more about what they may be up to. And so that's the nuance of a level 2 notification. And then with a level 3 notification, law enforcement provides information broadly, broad public information. And that can come in many different shapes and formats. And it really comes down to how law enforcement communicates best with its community. And we in the Department of Corrections commend and thank the New Ulm Police Department and all of its efforts to make sure this information gets out to the largest amount of people possible. So now I'd like to transition a little bit into the data that was collected and gained from all that research I spoke about earlier that informs that risk assessment tool so that you can use it and apply it in your own personal, family, and community safety planning efforts. And so where I really like to begin is kind of at the narrowest end of that funnel of offending conduct. And that funnel really goes with those offenses that occur are at the broadest end of that funnel. And of those that occur, we know that only a fraction go on to even get reported to law enforcement, and the funnel narrows. And from those that get reported, we know that only a portion of those go on to be charged. We narrow further. And of those charged, we know only a portion of those go on to receive sentences or convictions. And of those, we know a smaller portion yet will go on to cross the threshold of prison. And so you know now that those that do cross the threshold get that risk level assessment and ultimately have an assigned level. And that number does fluctuate and change, as we mentioned earlier, of those coming into the prison system. But what we find is that the breakdown of risk levels assigned, despite the numbers coming in through or crossing that threshold, stays fairly static. And as you can see here, the majority of levels assigned year after year are those of levels 1 or 2. 15% on average are those level 3 designees. And that's the group we're able to share more broadly. And think back to that slide with those smaller numbers to the right and how much more we want to broaden our awareness to the larger context of what's really going on. So another snapshot, and you can go online right now or at your convenience to the Department of Corrections website and you can look up the public registrant search. It's under the locator tool. Select the locator, go to the public registrant search, and you can search by, you can say show them all to me, or you can search by county, you can search by city, you can search by zip code, and so on. And if you were to go on there on the 7th, when I went on, and you say show them all to me, you would have seen 464 registrants subject to broad public notification living within Minnesota. And if you say, show me those that are out of compliance, at that time you would have seen 14. And so again, you can see how that broad awareness is just so very critical, because we know that these individuals do not solely exist where their head hits the pillow at night. We know that they cross all manner of municipal lines, city lines, county lines, and so on, for all kinds of reasons and purposes, for work and treatment, for social get-togethers with family or support of others, and so on. And so having that broad awareness, as you can see, is just so critical. Other information I want to share with you as you're contemplating those safety plans and looking to augment them further is the breakdown of the relationships between the offender and the victim. And now this data actually comes from the U.S. Department of Justice, but it really mirrors our state information quite well. And I like to give it to you just as some diversity in the data I'm throwing out there. But what we found and what they found here, as you can see, is that the majority of those who engage in this type of harm against children and teens have a relationship with them. They're either familial based, or they're a friend or a trusted adult who they have a relationship. You see here from this information that 7% fall into that stranger category. And this is the category that gives us the most pause, as it should, because when it comes to familial or acquaintances, we as parents and trusted adult support people have a lot of control of who gets to have those all-important relationships with our children. But that stranger group obviously gives us that pause, because this is a group we don't have that direct influence over. And so it's important to understand some of the limitations of this research. And one of the biggest components here to keep in mind is that those researchers had to create a cutoff point for what constitutes a relationship. And that determination was made to be 24 hours. If they could not show through all of their review of all available data and information that there was a knowing or a relationship of 24 hours or greater, that incident fell into the stranger category. So inevitably what you would get in scenarios like that are situations where, say, two teens meet up at a gathering, at a house party. And they haven't met each other before, but they hit it off, the night's going the way it's going, and they leave the group, they leave the watchful eyes of that group to someplace isolated, whether it's in the home or outside of the home, and the night takes an awful turn. Now this incident would fall into that stranger category. But what we tend to think of more as parents, as supportive adults and loved ones, when we think of strangers, is that person lurking just beyond our awareness, just outside of our scope of knowledge, who has ill intent. Now that group tends to fall in a much smaller percentage range of about 3%. And that is very cold comfort, I'm well aware. But as you're thinking about your resources and how to apply them most effectively, I don't want you focusing every bit of your energy on that 3% alone. Because we know the more likely scenario will be a relationship-based incident. And so we want that awareness broad. Other information that I want to share with you as you're thinking about those safety plans is on the breakdowns of ages impacted by this type of harm. And if you're like me, you look at this information and you see it's broken into thirds, but very quickly you look at the age breakdowns on the right. And you see that 2/3 of this group are children. And then you really start to look at that narrowest age range up there, those teenage years, that 13 to 17 group, constitutes 33% of those harmed. That's 9% of the population. It is worth getting into more detail about what's going on here. And what we know from all of our collaborations and work with foundations like the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center is that those children in those early years, the infancy on up and through into those preteen years, still very much fall under the watchful guidance of their trusted adult support network. And so we as agencies want to make sure we're providing the best information for those adults who vet the people coming into those children's lives. But what we find when we get into those critical teenage years is the very thing that we seek and strive to attain within all communities. And that is a place where our children can grow and thrive and develop their autonomy and go out and create and found relationships on their own. And they deserve every bit of that. But it is the very thing that makes them vulnerable to this type of harm. And so what we've found is the way we used to talk to our teens wasn't as effective as it could be. The old model of the talk, where we pulled our teen aside at that critical age as loved ones, as parents, and said, the world is not as safe as it had been made to be for you when you were younger. And what we found is with our teens, we get really kind of one of two distinct reactions. Either, Mom, Dad, you're overreacting, my friends are fine, and I'm perfectly safe. Or on the flip side, this is very frightening information, and I will no longer engage in the things I've come to love in my life. Neither reaction is what we seek to achieve, because we know that scared kids do not equal safe kids. But we also need our kids to understand that nice people do not always equal safe people. And so I'm going to provide you some additional information and resources to assist you as you're thinking about having those age-appropriate conversations with your children that build on one another all the way up and through those critical teenage years as we get into this information further. But now I want to shift gears and talk to you directly about the person you're here to learn about today. Use the information I've provided thus far as an overlay. See where things align and see where they may diverge. This is Quintin Branch. First, I want to speak about photographs. Photographs are updated on average of annually, or should the subject change their appearance in a significant way. So if you were to see this person or anyone else who you know to be on that public registry and they no longer look like the photograph, certainly let law enforcement or corrections know. And they will attain updated photos and get them onto the registry, where I will then attain them and make sure they are on that public registrant search function, so you always have an accurate photographic depiction of them. These are Branch's vitals. They're currently 25 years of age and will be residing at the 1300 block of North Broadway Street. Now, often in meetings like this, one of the predominant questions that will come up is about the address. Why, Brad, do we use a proximal address? Can you tell us where they reside? It would give us a great deal of comfort if we knew where their head hit the pillow at night. And you'll recall from my earlier information that that specific data is protected by law and is only shared amongst corrections and law enforcement for the specific purposes of monitoring this population. However, we do accomplish a lot with a proximal address, because no doubt those within this area, within this community, if they are not already aware of this individual, will become aware of them as they see them come and go. And they'll share that information among themselves, and that's just fine. But what we do not want as broader agencies is for that information to get out more openly, and for someone who is well outside of this community here, who wants to come in and exact some vigilante revenge scenario that does nothing to mitigate risk and only serves to disrupt the very thing you've all worked so hard to achieve. And so this is why the proximal addresses are utilized. This is the registrable offense history for Branch. Thing to keep in mind here is this is not an exhaustive criminal history. This focuses on the conduct and behavior that placed them onto the registry and then ultimately led to that risk level assessment and assignment. And so this is on the fact sheets that you have available to you, so I'll get right into the details of what occurred. In 2015, Branch was convicted of criminal sexual conduct, 4th degree, here in Brown County for a 2014 incident or offense or pattern. The conduct was against a 13-year-old male. He was 18 at the time and was known to this victim and had a significant relationship. They used their relationship of trust to exploit that unmonitored contact that they were able to have with the victim. And manipulation and force were used by Branch to maintain, or in his attempts to maintain, that contact. This, like I had mentioned, had multiple separate incidences over a period of months. Once this information became known, once the victim was able to share this with a trusted adult and get this information to law enforcement where they were able to intervene and act quickly, Branch was convicted and ultimately sentenced to 18 months prison. Now, that sentence was initially stayed for 10 years. So it's worth using this as an opportunity to explain another question that often will come up in meetings like this, and that is, Brad, why is it that someone who engages in this type of harm, that shocks the conscience, why is it that they come out only to potentially re-engage in similar conduct or behavior? And part of the answer to that lies here in determinate sentencing. So prior to determinate sentencing, the state had a more familiar type of release known as parole, where an individual, when they were eligible for community time, would come before a panel or a board, and it would be determined whether or not they'd be granted release under supervision. And often, for those who engaged in this type of harm, they found it exceptionally difficult to be granted the opportunity to enter the community. Now, upon hearing that often, the sense of in a community meeting is, that's okay. They can sit for their entire sentence, Brad. We're fine with that. But what we found from the research that I mentioned earlier was that this model wasn't as effective at impacting recidivism as we knew we could be. And so what we've moved to, and in fact most of the nation has moved to now, is a model of determinate sentencing where by law, the individuals who get committed to the Commissioner of Corrections, who get sentenced to prison, will serve 2/3 of their prison time in the institution, and 1/3 mandatorily will be served in the community. It is not the decision or discretion of a judge, of law enforcement, or of corrections. It is determined by the law. And so when they re-enter on that final third, this is the opportunity that we have before us to ensure that they are following through with all of the things that they've learned and been taught while in the institution and applying them effectively while reintegrating into the community, because we know this, that sentence will expire and they will reenter the community. And that old model, the way it worked was that at expiration, that individual would be walked to the gate and told, don't come back. With this model, they come out with that final third, and in fact, there's enhancers that extend that final third for this unique population now. And they have that additional time to work with their corrections agents and law enforcement to ensure that they are successfully and appropriately applying those mitigation techniques and strategies to ensure a lifetime of quiet existence. And so that is how determinate sentencing works. Now you'll see here that in September of 2016, that stay was vacated. So up until from conviction or from sentencing in 2015 until September of 2016, Branch was in the community as a no-level assigned individual because he had not crossed the threshold of prison. But September 2016, the stay was vacated and they were committed to the Commissioner of Corrections for that 18-month period with that 10-year conditional release for this following crime. Again, 2015 conviction date for a 2008 to 2009 period of offending conduct. This occurred prior to the offense we just discussed. So this came out after that offense was going through its investigation process and so on. And so this crime focused on a minor male over a period of time from ages 12 to 13, and Branch was 13 to 14, so a year apart, essentially. again, very much known to this individual, used or created that relationship to build trust and friendship, and exploited that unmonitored access once again. Used that same kind of manipulation and force, and also threats of violence to attempt to manage the victim. The victim, after years, was able to process what had happened and come forward. And law enforcement did just as they do, and investigated this and brought it before the court. And for this crime, Branch was convicted and sentenced to 94 months. And so this is what triggered the violation and ultimately that stay being vacated on the previous file that we just talked about. So this one has a 94-month commit, but because now we have subsequent convictions of same or similar pattern conduct, it triggers an enhancement on that sentencing. And this time, it's lifetime supervision. So Branch will now, because of the way these structures and enhancers work, be on supervision for life. So his prison chronology goes as follows. Branch enters the prison system in 2016, as you saw, at the sentencing of that most recent file and the vacate of the previous file's stay. So both of them run concurrently, the larger of the two being the governing file, and that 2/3 still applies even with a lifetime sentence. So he is assessed and assigned a risk level of 3 by the End of Confinement Review Committee. That assessment will occur 90 days or earlier prior to that release. And the release was on the 6th. So at that 2/3 mark, by law, Branch gets to re-enter the community under the watchful eyes of supervision. But because of that risk level designation of 3, that supervision is enhanced. So yet another enhancer, which is intensive supervised release. And so these are other components of that broader risk management system, from the sentencing enhancements to the supervision enhancements. So as it sits for Branch, they will be under supervision and monitored by corrections for life. They will also be subject to the registry for life. Branch will be monitored by corrections and have to report to law enforcement all of the information we discussed, where they work, where they live, what they drive, et cetera, for life. And for as long as Branch maintains that designation of 3, their information will be broadly available to you. So now I want to take an opportunity to shift gears and bring up my colleague with intensive supervised release to share with you more detail about how that program functions and works here in Minnesota.
Hello, my name is Gary Wilfert, and I work for the South Central Intensive Supervised Release Team. I am one of 5 agents that cover a wide range of 11 counties from the South Metro all the way down to the Minnesota-Iowa border. For intensive supervised release, we have 3 main goals, one being public safety, compliance with release conditions, and successful reintegration to the community. Prior to any individual being released to ISR, there's a joint effort by both institutional staff and agents to try and identify what is going to be the safest, most stable environment for the individual being released, both to minimize risk factors and maximize any protective factors. We use tools of supervision such as GPS for accountability, and we take into consideration public safety right from the start, as the individual is released from prison directly to an agent to be able to make sure that individual is delivered to their approved residence. And again, successful re-entry here is a primary goal. We need to make sure we can connect the dots between what is stable and supportive in someone's life, as well as positive interactions within the community, so that we can minimize any failures and maximize our successes. Our team operates every day, 24/7, 365. There's never a time of day, day of the week, weekends, holidays where someone is not available to take a call or be available to help you with an issue. We have a highly structured supervision, meaning we use tools in the community, such as, for this individual, community programming, which would be sex offender treatment. We use tools such as GPS, again, for accountability. We have weekly schedules that these individuals must submit so that they're pre-approved in advance and we know what they're doing at all times. We use a combination of a reduced caseload size and many face-to-face contacts per week to be able to get to know these individuals on a very regular basis and a personal basis. We know about their lives. All of our visits are random and unannounced, and we operate off the beauty of surprise. Daily contact will be made with Branch for the rest of his life, as long as he's on ISR supervision. Our supervision team consists of 5 agents, being Kirsten Isaacson, Sean McMonigal, Dave Barledge, myself, and Eric Starkey. Our supervisor is Kelly Blake. There is a phone number on the bottom here that you can call with any questions or concerns, but I would ask that if anything is heightened or you want to report anything, to use your local law enforcement as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And as you heard Gary say, really, as you're getting your head around not only the information about this individual, but as you're broadening your scope of awareness to think about all those potential risk areas within perhaps your own community or more broadly, know that your best and most direct support is your local law enforcement. The New Ulm Police Department has been dealing with this population for a very long time, and this is not new to them. They do an exceptional job, as you've all no doubt experienced through your time living or frequenting the city. And so utilize them. If you have just questions about basic policing practices, or you want to know maybe how they do what they do with this unique population, certainly call the non-emergency number. But as you heard, if you see a situation with this individual or anyone that raises the hair on the back of your neck or gives you pause or concern, we want you calling 911, because as you saw, there are a number of individuals we don't get to have this level of knowledge on who may be frequenting communities just like New Ulm. And so if you see something going on, by reporting that information, even if it's a partial vehicle description or a partial physical description, we see that with that registry tool, law enforcement can run those searches and say, narrow my search to this radius, these criteria, and really hone in on a unique or specific group that they're going to want to go out and meet with or interview in a time of need. And so do keep that in mind. Other resources that I want to share with you, again, as you're thinking about those broader safety planning efforts, kind of bringing you back to those conversations, those age-appropriate conversations with your children or loved ones, utilize the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. Let them be one of the cornerstones of your safety planning efforts and initiatives. The JWRC will come out. They do community outreach frequently. They give talks at schools. They do workshops for children or adults or both. And they are a fantastic resource right here in our very own state. As far as local resources go, I want to make sure you are aware of your local victim services provider. Information like this, no matter how hard we try, has a way of tearing open old wounds. And from what we know about these types of incidences that occur is that the likelihood that someone viewing this video that either has themselves been directly impacted by this type of harm or has supported somebody who's been impacted are good. And we want to make sure that if this conversation has opened up those wounds or has stirred up those feelings, that you know who to reach out to most directly. If you know of someone in your own life or more broadly that may be benefiting from this type of support and resources, we want you to make sure you're reaching out and getting them the help they may very well need and deserve. As I'm wrapping things up today, and I've thrown a great deal of information at you, and thank you for bearing with me. If you take nothing else with you today, please let it be this: the 3 90s and the 2 R's. that from what we know, from all of our research and data, and we know a lot, is that 90% of those who engage in this type of harm, once they have come through that full array of that state risk management system, do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. 90% of those who engage in this type of harm are known to the people they hurt and use those relationships to exploit that trust. Which means if you're thinking about this entire population and if we could remove them from our community right now, all of them, all of the ones we've identified and know about, we would have impacted harm, sexual harm in our state by no greater than 10%. Year after year, we see for cases coming through the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, who collates and maintains this data, if you're interested in reviewing it, year after year, those sentenced for sex crimes, 90% or better, are brand new to this system and not previously known as sex offenders. And so this is why you can see broad awareness is so important. By understanding the individuals we get to talk about, you can apply that awareness much more broadly and much more successfully. Folks, it really does come down to that social proximity piece. That relationship is so much more telling that an individual gets to have with a potential victim than any geographical proximity ever could be. Because where these individuals lay their head at night is where their risk is at its lowest. It's where they spend those waking hours that we need our awareness broadened. And we know that those waking hours can be spent virtually anywhere. And so keep that in mind. I'm going to put these up on the screen just so you have them available. You can capture a screenshot. Don't let this be the only information you receive on this important topic. Here's some other great resources for you to look at as you're taking the time to gain more data and knowledge. And then lastly, for state resources, the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, while it maintains the predatory offender registry, and that is for law enforcement purposes only, it does allow you to do a criminal history search on anyone. All you need is a first name, last name, and date of birth. And so if you're vetting somebody coming into the lives of children, perhaps you're looking at hiring a coach for a youth soccer team or something, or a tutor or a babysitter, utilize this tool. All you need is the individual's first name, last name, and date of birth, and you can see a criminal history printout. And then the Department of Corrections website, where we maintain all the research and data that I've been sharing with you today in its pure form, not just in the pie charts, so that you can review it and read through it and draw your own conclusions. And I encourage you to do so, especially if you're wondering or questioning some of the information. Certainly, please take the time to give it a look. We also maintain that locator, as I mentioned. This is for not only those public registrants, but anyone who's currently under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections. So if you know of a person or an individual that you've read about in the paper and you want to know what's going on with them, and they're under the jurisdiction of the DOC, that's your search tool. And then the public registrant search, where those 470 some that we just had up here a moment ago, if you want to see them all, say show them all to me, that's where you'll go. Or if you want to see this individual again to see if the photos have been updated or something like that. That's also a really great tool if the individual leaves the community. Law enforcement may provide notification upon the exit of a registrant if they can determine that that person will not re-enter the community. Obviously, that's pretty difficult to determine, and so more likely you'll be able to just go on to that registrant search and you can see if they've left and where they've gone to. So you can look them up by name, specifically by their offender identification number, and by their location. Obviously, this is the place where we would open it up for Q&A. As the detective said earlier, please do reach out with your questions. If it's law enforcement specific, certainly contact the NUPD. If it's supervision specific, please call the intensive supervised release team. And if it's got anything to do with the notification process, risk level assessment, assignment, and more broad, certainly feel free to contact myself. Thank you to the New Ulm Police Department and to all of you for taking the time and having us out here today. Take care.